Hello and welcome back. I'm very happy that YouTube has extended the maximum allowed video time to 15 minutes from 10 minutes because I just may need it. This is another haul from the Book Thing of Baltimore, which is a wonderful nonprofit that gives out free books every weekend and also accepts donations of any books you have that you don't want. First, I got Shen Fan by William Hinton. This is his follow-up to a book he did called Fan Shen about a Chinese village in the midst of revolution, of how it was a village they were building after the Cultural Revolution, and it was just about how the village was run and what it was like, sort of a cultural anthropological account. And that first book, Fan Shen, was published in 1966, but he continued going to the village and seeing how they were progressing, and this follow-up was published in 1981. Next, I got The White Tiger. This was a really highly acclaimed book. It came out a couple of years ago, so I'm looking forward to reading it. I believe it's a political satire. Then another novel, Secrets of the Sea, by Nicholas Shakespeare, who wrote a novel I have not read called The Dancer Upstairs, but I saw the film adaptation of that novel and really enjoyed it. This is Jernigan by David Gates. I felt a little bit guilty taking this one because I have his other novel, Preston Falls, which I have not yet read, although I really want to. But I haven't seen this book, Jernigan, there before. And I kept thinking to myself, what if I really like Preston Falls and then I really want to read Jernigan? So I got it. Next is Rapture by Susan Minot, or I think it's pronounced Minot, I'm not sure. This book actually sounds pretty awful. It just sounds like a total hoot though, and it's only, I mean, look how skinny it is. I figured it would be kind of fun. Jenny Wren, classic novel. Another classic, 50 Stories by Kay Boyle. Movement and Revolution on American Radicalism. And this is about the radicalism of the 1960s. Next is Way Down on the High Lonely by Don Winslow. I also felt a little guilty about getting this one because, as you recall from my last video perhaps, I got another Don Winslow novel last month, and I still have quite a few of his novels that I have not read yet. But this looked really good, so I took it. And I really loved his novel, The Winter of Frankie Machine, so I figured I should just stock up. Next is Desire Lines by Jack Gantos. I read his autobiography, Hole in My Life, and thought that was pretty good. So I'm looking forward to checking out one of his young adult novels. Next is The Quality of Light, Modern Italian Short Stories. And What Can I Do When Everything's on Fire? I've never heard of this book or this author, but somehow the title and the cover kind of grabbed me, and I couldn't even tell from the back of the book exactly what it's about. There were a bunch of really laudatory blurbs, so I'll have to give this another look. Next is Minor Elizabethan Drama, Pre-Shakespearean Tragedies. Haven't you always been curious what minor Elizabethan drama was? I don't know. I'm curious. Another classic, The Collected Tales of A.E. Coppard. American Renaissance, a classic work of literary criticism by F.O. Mathiasson, who also did a big biography of the James family, William Henry, Alice, all those people, which I have but have not read yet, but he's supposed to be a really good critic. Next is Ernest Hemingway's A Movable Feast. I have to confess, I think the only things I've read by Hemingway are The Old Man and the Sea, which I read when I was pretty young. I think I was maybe 11 or so. And I liked it just fine. It didn't really change my life. And I've read a couple short stories by him, which also I enjoyed, but weren't really life-changing. I have a bunch of his novels sitting around, but I picked this up because he was friends with Gertrude Stein and a bunch of other luminaries, and I just thought, and this is nonfiction, this is a memoir, so I just thought this would be interesting literary history. Next is a French history, La vie quotidienne aux États-Unis à la veille de la guerre de sécession. So it's a French history of the U.S. just before the Civil War, 1830 to 1860. And I thought that sounded kind of fascinating, just the French take on what we were up to back then. Next is Pêcheur des Landes by Pierre Loti. This is a classic, I believe it's a novel about an Icelandic fisherman, but it might be an ethnographic report. Next I got, what is this? Oh, it's by Lautréamont, who wrote, what is it called? Les Chants de Mal d'Aurore. So this is a classic. Then I got a Joyce Carol Oates novel, Maria a Life. In my very first book haul, I talked about Joyce Carol Oates and how she was one of the first adult contemporary authors that I really started reading. I was really into her books when I was about 12 or 13. And I also realized that the very first book I read by her was Unholy Loves, which also happened to be the very first campus novel I ever read. And I, after that, became a huge fan of the campus novel genre, and the novel I'm working on is in that genre, so I really owe her a lot. Then I got Watch the North Wind Rise, a novel by Robert Graves, who wrote the wonderful I, Claudius, and also probably one of the best retellings of the Greek myths I've ever read, which is just called The Greek Myths. Yet another Bernard Malamud, God's Grace. I have a lot of his stuff, and I've only read A New Life so far, but I thought that was really good, so I'm sort of collecting him. And I love these covers. I love the font that all his, the older versions of his books are in. And for some reason, I decided I needed to get David Carradine's autobiography, Endless Highway. It sounds like he lived kind of a crazy life, and just thought it sounded interesting. Next is Reading Like a Writer by Francine Prose. I was at one time a huge fan of, I guess what now is the middle period of Francine Prose's fiction writing. I loved her novels Blue Angel, Primitive People, Hunters and Gatherers, and her story collections Women and Children First and The Peaceable Kingdom. But then her writing took a turn that I wound up considering kind of sentimental, and I haven't really read a lot of her more recent work. It just doesn't appeal to me quite as much, but I still think she's a really great stylist and is super smart, so I would like to see what she has to say about literature and writing. Let's see. Another novel, Polly by Amy Bryant. Christoph Heinz, The Distant Lover. Apparently he was a major force in East German literature back when there was an East Germany and a West Germany. Quick Studies, The Best of Lingua Franca. Lingua Franca is one of those magazines I always sort of meant to subscribe to and never did, and so I guess I'll read their best of. Oh, I was so excited to find this. This is a novel, I Do Not Come to You by Chance. And it was published a couple years ago, and the main character is a Nigerian scammer. You know those emails you get saying that someone needs to get money out of the country, or someone died and doesn't have an heir, and they need you to wire money, that kind of thing, those scams. Well, the protagonist of this novel is one of the perpetrators of those scams, and those emails always fascinate me, so I'm really looking forward to reading this novel. Next is an NYRB classic, Season of Migration to the North. Ooh, this is a George Alec Effinger, A Fire in the Sun. This is one of the sequels to his novel When Gravity Fails, which was, I think, a pretty seminal cyberpunk novel, and which I quite enjoyed. I enjoyed it reasonably enough when I read it, but it's one of those books I enjoy even more when I think about it later, so I'm looking forward to reading the sequel. Next is, Trouble by Faye Weldon. Faye Weldon's The Life and Loves of a She-Devil is an absolutely great book. It's really dark and a little bit gruesome, but just a must-read. And apparently when she wrote that book, which is a really bitter take on sort of men, women, relationships, the whole thing, she was happily married, and then eventually her marriage broke up, and she wrote this one, which is supposedly even more bitter. So I'm curious. Next is The Field of Vision by Wright Morris. Wright Morris was a really big deal in the 50s, I believe, and he isn't much read these days, but I'd like to read this. I was so excited to find this one. This is Perdido by Jill Robinson. Jill Robinson wrote one of the few memoirs that really had almost a visceral effect on me. It was called Bedtime Story, and it was about her addiction to speed, and she falls in love with a man who's addicted to alcohol, and they sort of manage to pull themselves up out of their addictions. And that's usually not the kind of book I like at all, but for some reason that book just had the weirdest effect on me. I mean, I dreamed about it, I had nightmares about it, and so apparently she wrote a novel, so I hope this doesn't give me nightmares, but I'm really eager to read it. Let's see. Another couple novels, Summer People and Dance on My Grave. Yet another Bobby Kennedy book. To find out about why I'm so obsessed with Bobby Kennedy, you need to watch one of my first two book haul videos. Classic play, Women Beware Women by Thomas Middleton. And both volumes of Angels in America, which I've already read, but thought was pretty interesting. A memoir from the 70s called Widow. Another couple novels, In Praise of Older Women, and Norman Mailer's Barbary Shore. The Samurai of Visegrad, which is a collection of stories about life in the Eastern European shtetls. Tell Me That You Love Me, Judy Moon, complete with cool Liza Minnelli movie tie-in cover. The Shortcut, very lurid-looking Italian novel. Night Drive, some contemporary German stories. And last but not least, Bosnian Chronicle by Ivo Andrić. And if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for my next video.